Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. And you might notice it's a sword on a stick because we don't use the dirty S word over here. I'm kidding. It's a hewing spear from Quinn Waterfield. And before I get into the review, a couple quick disclaimers. One, this is a review sample. It was sent to me kind of for free. I covered the shipping, which is not something I typically do, but I don't typically get to play with spears, particularly custom-made ones. So I jumped at the opportunity to tinker around with this a little bit, and do know that I didn't spend any real money on it. At least I didn't pay the same amount that a customer would. Now, this would be about $250 Canadian, $450 for the spearhead and shaft. I don't know what that is in freedom dollars, but it's $450 Canadian in the format that you're seeing. And shipping was round about $100, and UPS made that a nightmare, but that's a subject for a different video. Anyway, the other bit that you need to know about it is I don't know what the hell I'm doing with it. Now, I do study swordsmanship of a variety that includes polearms, and I haven't gotten to the spear part yet. And I don't study anything that uses this kind of spear, though it's not entirely dissimilar from a Japanese style spear. I haven't gotten to the part of the martial art that I studied that involves using the spear, so I'm going to look like a bit of a dunce moving it around. So keep that in mind as you hear my musings and ramblings. I've talked about swords for a long time on the internet, but I don't claim any expertise in that. I'm certainly unfamiliar with spears and less familiar with the market that presents itself. But it does seem like there are not a lot of options. Polearms, generally speaking, seem to be underrepresented, and I'm sure there are folks out there that would like a cool and a good one, and this happens to be one of those, foreshadowing. So hopefully I can explain why, and if you have any interest, you can contact Quinn. His details are in the bits down below. Now, I typically start these reviews with a pommel and end cap, and I go soup to nuts, top to bottom, and that's more or less what I'm going to do here, but I'm going to talk about the shaft, generally speaking, and I'm sure there's some innuendo in there. I don't mean it that way, or maybe I do, but the basic gist is big oak shaft, nearest I can tell, but there's some nuance here that is appreciable. One, there's no extra butt cap or anything like that on the end. If I were going to have Quinn make a spear, I might be inclined to have him put a spike or something at the end, maybe, just even a doorknob or something like that, so I could grab onto it and it would deliver a little bit more of a wallop if I swung the other end around and wanted to use it. And it would also keep the shaft from rotting if I used it to lean on, which is more than likely what I'm going to do. If I stick it in the ground, it's not going to get wet and absorb moisture the same way. So I think that would be something as an addition that I would like to see, but wasn't included on this one. Sometimes you can even just put a big brass thumbtack or something like that. You might find them at a hardware store or something like that. Just keeps it from the wood resting on things directly and can give it a little bit of separation. Anyway, it's finished reasonably well. The general shape is rectangular. It almost looks like a square, but it's not quite. I can tell where the edges are. So one side feels more or less wrong in my hands. It feels a little chubbier in my hands, and the other locks into my fingers in such a way where I can kind of tell where the edge is. I wouldn't say it indexes marvelously, but it does do a reasonable job of at least telling me where the edge is. I did have problems with edge alignment later, at least if I'm trying to use it to cut, which is, I understand it, a hewing spear should be able to do, but probably not as precisely as a sword. I'm not sure exactly what's fair here, but I could tell where the edge is and I could get the thing to cut, but I couldn't really get my alignment right. But as I have noted earlier, I'm unfamiliar with how to use the spear. So the shape-wise at least tells me where the edge is, and I'm sure with practice I could improve on it, but it'd be nice, I guess, if I could figure out where the edge was a little bit better. If I'm intended to cut with this, it's hard to be precise with it. At least out of the gate, it's hard to be precise with it. There's more features, though. As we look at a little more closely at the shaft of the spear, you notice that it's made from two sections. And so Quinn took two sections of wood and glued them together and kind of reversed where the grain is pointing. And that's going to keep the shaft straight, more or less. It's a little bit stronger. Those grains kind of fight against each other, and it keeps it also from warping. If I lean it on a wall, it's probably going to not get as all curvy and wonky and weird. If I set it on a stand or a wall, it's not going to bend as easily given that method of construction, and it also tends to be stronger. I did get a custom naginata from the Mystery Man in Black a while ago. That was a sword project actually many years ago, and I really liked the shaft. Even though it was smaller, it was really rigid and strong, and it didn't warp very easily, or at least it wouldn't. I didn't have it for very long. But I digress. It's a very solid way of constructing things, something easy to miss, something very well done by Quinn. The shaft is also really glides easily in my hand. It's finished well enough, is what I'll say. It's not like glassy smooth, or that he spends some disproportionately crazy amount of time doing finish work for something that's might get chewed up or handled a lot. But there's no slivers, nothing bites into my hands, and as I'm moving it around quite a bit, it's very, very comfortable to use, and is very consistent as well. So no spot feels like I'm completely out of alignment alignment with the weapon. It doesn't curve or twist around at all. I always know where the edge is. It always feels very consistent, and I always feel like I have a pretty solid grip on it, and I have no splinters or any other kind of issues. Nothing was rough or unfinished in such a way that it left me with slivers in my hands or anything like that, or even really any discomfort. I also found that with a glove or without a glove, I could hold on to it really well. Sometimes wooden stuff is done too slick. People are tempted to lacquer it or something like that, and that makes it slippery. It makes it chip off if you use it aggressively. Whatever finish work, stain you put on it seems to hold up really well and give me a lot of traction as well. When I got this stuck in a tree and I really had to wrench on it, I felt pretty glued to it. I felt like I was pretty in control. It didn't slip around. It didn't roll in my hands at all either. So if I go up, unfortunately, I don't have any video of me putting the shaft and spear together, and it's pretty well friction fit now, and I'd rather not try to take it apart. But it came in such a way where I was able to put the shaft on, and Quinn had it marked in such a way where I knew when to stop pounding the thing on the floor. So I put the shaft on inside the socket. It was all ground down and ready for me, and then I tapped it on the floor several times until the little hole that Quinn had already made in the shaft came into alignment, and then I put the little pin in, and that was it. And it really only fit one way. I got it roughly in the right spot, banged it on the floor, and it fell right into where Quinn had it kind of ground out and ready to fit. And there was a line that told me to stop. I put the pin in, and it's been really, really stable ever since. And so all that was all finished. Assembly was done so that the box could be marginally smaller and a little less expensive to fix. Really, really easy to put together though, fit together like a gem. And I'd also note that it seems pretty solid. So I haven't done super aggressive stuff with it, but that's honestly debatable. So I whacked it into a tree. I've tried cutting with it, and this shaft is not breaking in half. And very often I've had shafts that when I do similar types of cuts, they shatter, they break, the head comes off. They're only for thrusting, and if you try to swing or if anything hits it, that's it's okay for the shaft to break, and that's not what's happening here. I banged it on a tree, I threw it at a tree, I hit it while it was stuck in a tree, I cut some aggressive bottles and stuff like that, I whacked it into my stand, and the shaft is still together. The hilt and socket have not come off at all. It's really well, it was really easy to put together, and it's really tightly fitted, and no additional glue or anything. It was just friction fit with the pin, and that's been enough to keep it really, really solid. So I'm going to move up to the spearhead itself, and if I talk about first the socket, it's wrapped around, it's open in such a way where you can at least make out where the shaft is running up the socket. It's not completely closed and welded. Quinn might be able to do stuff like that. I'm not exactly sure, but generally speaking, he could probably make a closed socket. It's also got like kind of forge scale and stuff on it, and I really happen to like the way this looks, and it means that I can like hold it and not worry about the patina. I actually really happen to appreciate the kind of forging look to it. It's also not grubby, so whatever he's done to finish it, it's not coming off on my hands. If I hold the socket and I use it, or if I pull on it, or I'm somehow come in contact with the socket while I'm manipulating the weapon, it doesn't make my hands all filthy, which is appreciated. If it were just left as forge scale, chances are it would be kind of grubby and yucky. So it's been cleaned off and finished in such a way where at least it's not coming off on my hands, as well as the little socket pin thing. There's a little pin that goes in the socket that holds some kind of mechanical connection onto the shaft apart from just friction fitting. Not that that wouldn't be enough necessarily, but it seems on there pretty tight by itself without the pin. But that pin is also smoothed over in such a way that if I bring my hands up on it, nothing is catching me. It doesn't fall out. It doesn't snag me. It doesn't hurt me. It's not drawing blood. If I move my hand over it, I hardly really notice it and use it, which is appreciated. The ergonomics are really quite comfortable. There's a little bit of a ledge on the outer edge of the socket, but not honestly even that much. If my hand comes in contact with the socket while I'm manipulating the weapon and trying to move at speed and don't have gloves on, it's still pretty comfortable. So that brings us up to kind of, I would say, the junction after the socket to where it transitions to the blade. You can start to see tool marks, grinding marks. I imagine Quinn could finish this to some greater degree if that's preferred. Usually finer finish works tend to just be time and money. So you can talk to him about how much it would cost to finish this off and some other kind of detail. But this junction area is at least reasonably well done. I wouldn't say that it's bad, but it's not particularly pretty either, and could have better finish work. But I would say this is maybe where I encountered, if I have any issue, and it's right here. So I think this is the transition between where the heat treatment stops And more or less, if I try to slap the weapon on a tree, it bends easily enough. And, I turn it around and I slap it the other way, and I'm doing percussive maintenance to get it straight. Conceivably, in a battle, you could be thrusting with this, and if somebody bats it out of the way, it's entirely possible if they come in contact with that junction area that they're going to bend the spear, and it still may be in some format that you can use it as a weapon, though less effectively because it won't kind of be straight. It'll be harder to target. But you could put it on the ground, step on it, and bend it back into straight, and you're back in the game. As I look at other hewing spears, and I have no real experience in this, I'm not versed historically on how hewing spears were made, but as I tried to find examples of antiques, it looks like this section, the junction between the shaft and the socket, as well as the spear, is usually reinforced in some way, and there may be some other ridge section that comes up, some other reinforcement to strengthen this area, because it seems like it would bend easy, or it could bend easy if you're using it aggressively. So it's worth noting it didn't bend when I threw it at a tree, or when I cut things with it, or when I smacked it around lightly. But as soon as I slapped it on a tree with some degree of force, I would say it bent over pretty easy, and that's not a huge surprise. It's not supposed to spring back into shape, but a little bit more meat on the bone there would probably not impact the overall weight and dynamics of the spear, and it would probably be a little bit harder to bend, which I think could be important. Conceivably, these things are kind of out. People are batting them away to get in close, especially if they have shorter weapons, and it's possible that the spear would bend, and even though you could straighten it out, that would be perhaps precious time that you don't have. So a little reinforcement there, I think, would be welcome if there's any change that I would make. I don't know how ahistoric it is. I'm sure there's examples like this, but it seemed like there's plenty of other examples with a little bit more meat on the bone around that transition to the spear. Where it flares out as well and comes into the blade, I think these are a little asymmetrical as well. Again, this is a prototype, so I'm not complaining too much. It's also pretty cost effective for a spearhead that is custom made. So I'm not necessarily expecting the world here, but even grinding would be appreciated, and I'd almost like it to flare a little bit more. At least that's what I see in some of the examples that are out there. But I happen to like it overall. It also came razor sharp, so it's very sharp. I didn't have a whole lot of cutting with it, but I bet if I just had the spearhead and tried to use it like a short sword, I'd probably be able to line it up and actually cut really well. It was sharp enough to cut pool noodles and bottles and things like that, but not. I was not particularly successful in doing that, and I think it's more of a me problem than a spear problem. Other notes about the blade, though: it's about 18 inches long, so it's a pretty long spear blade, as well as it has a very strong central ridge. It's not, it's buffed down a little bit. It's not particularly strong, but with some element of polishing, it could be brought out. And the spear also has some element of distal taper and refinement, which is something I've come to expect from Quinn. He's a very talented and knowledgeable blacksmith, and so you can see in the measurements that I've taken down below, it thickens and thins out, and he's got some command of shape and dynamics. He's not just stamping it out and moving along. It's not one piece of bar. It has a little bit of elegance and dynamics to it, which I don't know how to expect or really appreciate or feel as much in a spear as I do in a sword, but I can tell you that it's overall pretty comfortable to use. So in the usage side of things, it balances right about where you would hold the spear kind of standing, about 50 inches up the shaft. I've noted that in the description down below, but that happens to be about where I would just kind of stand and hold it. So from that position, if I were holding a shield, I feel like I could use it offensively. It's pretty, well balanced. If I want to kind of turn it around and throw it, my hand is kind of just by nature of where I would hold it, ready to go. It doesn't rattle a lot as well, so in using it as I whacked it on the tree of woe, I hit it into things, and I didn't feel like an enormous amount of vibration or discomfort in my hand. Nothing was trying to break my grip or trying to make it fall apart and shake out of my hands, which is appreciated. I haven't had a lot of pole arms that do that, but sometimes if people get the nodes and stuff wrong, where it shakes and vibrates can cause a lot of shock in your hand when you impact things, and I didn't feel any of that in this particular case. Using it as well, I chucked it at a tree and I was pulling it out. I didn't find that it loosened or anything came apart or anything like that. So I'll talk about being abusive in just a minute, but worth knowing that comfort-wise, it held up reasonably well to those things, and it was comfortable to pull out, and I felt like I had grip and it didn't shock in my hands as I was using it. But more or less what I can do are some pretend ideas of what to do with the spear. You may see my Japanese polearm influence here. I can't show any kata. It's not something I'm allowed to do because the martial art I study that has polearms in it doesn't let me do filming and stuff, but naturally that influence is probably going to come through, and I don't know of the right way to use the spear. But as you see me moving it around, I thought it was really comfortable. It's not so long that I can't manipulate it. It's about as tall as a bow would be in the martial art that I use, as opposed to like a naginata. But I find that I can kind of use it either way. I can cut with it, I can throw it out there, it holds up well, and the shaft didn't come off while I was cutting. Now, in terms of actually cutting, I cut pool noodles horribly. I could see, cuts where if I was cutting a person, they would not be happy. They would be dead. They would be cut very deeply, I guess I would say. But I didn't have any really smooth cuts ever with the spear. And I'm not used to cutting with a spear. It's not something that I practice. I practice with a wooden spear, and I don't typically cut with them. So there's a lot of ground for me to cover here. I think I could do better. It was certainly sharp enough to do it, but I couldn't quite get it right. Now, cutting into the bottles, I was able to cut bottles, but I wouldn't say I cut them particularly well. So it cut them and then flew them around, but I was able to deliver cuts, certainly. So my edge alignment could use a lot of attention, and I could just use better form overall while I'm cutting. And it's something I think I should do, because while I practice with a naginata, I need to think about that. And cutting with a spear is a helpful thing to have some idea of how to implement that in my training, or the training that I'm doing doesn't factor over into real life. And I find it to be at least a useful, thoughtful thing to do, and helps me point out some things that I'm probably doing wrong when I go and practice the martial arts side of things, even though this is not the type of spear or naginata type thing that I would use. Anyway, not a lot of luck cutting. But then I went and I chucked it at a tree. And so in terms of chucking, the safest place is where I'm aiming, really. I'm not particularly good at hitting things. I honestly have to aim at something else to hit the thing that I want to hit. It's pretty ridiculous. I've never been good at throwing things. But as comical as it is to see me miss a tree as I'm standing very close to it, it really penetrates incredibly deeply into a tree. It's easy to get this thing to just stick like an arrow into a tree, and it's 4 pounds roughly, so it's a lot to have hanging off of a tree, but it penetrates most of the time about 2 inches into the tree, sometimes a little bit more, and it gets stuck there pretty good. It was not easy to come out. I have to kind of wrangle it and wiggle it to get it to come out, and each time that I did that, I didn't see any bending. I had to kind of flex it to get the tip to come out. No problem doing that. The tip always stayed straight. I never experienced any actual bending in the blade or sharpened portion itself. So then I went over to the tree of woe after chucking it at a tree and not having really any problem. Well, actually, before I went to the tree of woe, I banged it on the tree, and that's where I noticed that the shaft would bend, and I could straighten it out and whatnot, but banging it on the tree directly relatively hard caused it to bend pretty easily. On the tree of woe, I tried doing some cutting into things, and I didn't notice that the shaft was breaking. What I was looking for here is, can I strike with the kind of force I typically would, which isn't holding it at the very end and swinging as hard as I can at the tree. That well could cause any wooden thing to break. But could I deliver an effective strike and have the shaft not break? And that is what did not happen. The shaft was stable, and I was able to deliver thrust. And I also tried doing some exercises where could I get the spear to thrust where I wanted to. And I wasn't exactly pleased with my performance, but I did generally get in the right area. And so I felt like I had reasonable control with the spear itself. It was overall fun to move around, and I was reasonably accurate with it, and it's an overall pretty durable thing. But if I could make one suggestion, would be to make that shaft area a little bit bigger, and once I started bending it, I think it's going to bend a little bit easier. It's not complete metal fatigue yet, but the first time I bent it, it became easier to bend it back and forth, and then I would notice that it would bend a little bit. So a little more reinforcement there, I think, would be a welcome thing. But that would be about the only suggestion that I'd really have, because other than that, it was a lot of fun to use. And so that's really all I think I can share with you. I've talked about the bits and bobs and fits and features and kind of gone over, and you've gotten to see some close-ups of the blade. I talked about moving it around, trying to think about it as a practitioner, even though I don't study anything with a hewing spear directly. And then I talked about cutting things with it, such as it is. So hopefully at this point you have some idea if something like this from Quinn is worth your money or not. For $250 for the spearhead, and then being able to go to a hardware store and maybe find a shaft, it wouldn't be as good, but I think that's pretty cool for a custom-made custom-made object. And if you can expect it to be a little prettier than this, all the better. For $450, it's not an inexpensive thing, but you really can't look at like the windlass things and some of the spears that Hanway puts out as equivalent. I've had some of those. The shafts break. This is like a real and functional spear. Some of the other spears that are out there often tend to be a little bit more decorative because the shafts just don't stand up to doing spear-like things or any kind of polearm things. They've broken on me and they don't hold up to the same kind of thing. The shaft tends to break before I get the blade to flex or break at all. And so testing has often been pretty quick on those things because the build quality doesn't stand up. And this absolutely does. This is kind of ready for war. It might bend a little bit. I might have some suggestions, but I was able to chuck it at trees. And it was fine. I was able to cut with it. And the shaft, if you use this in the normal realm of what you would use and not swing it hard at a tree, or you're careful about people batting it away in some sort of aggressive encounter, I think overall you're going to be fine. So yes, I do. Quinn always does really solid work. I don't think this is any exception, and it doesn't seem ridiculously expensive for what you're getting. And it was a ton of fun. As a guy who typically plays with swords, to get a sword on a stick was just invigorating and fun and different, and hopefully you thought so as well. So anyway, that's all I got. Special thanks to Quinn for sending this my way. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it gave you something to think about as sword people who maybe want to have a spear. If you want to have a long range sword, then maybe this is worthy of consideration. Anyway, that's all I got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.